These folks are leading the charge, leading the committees, so I'm really excited to hear more about that. But I wanted to start off with the question, and this can go for any one of you, of what does it mean to fund systems instead of students, and vice versa? What does it mean if we were to actually look at a system where we're focused on the student rather than the system?
So I have something that happened in committee when I was presenting my universal education freedom accounts bill. We actually had a Democrat state senator ask me if I was aware the per pupil spending funded the retirement systems. So when we're talking about funding systems and not students, they actually said the quiet part out loud. They are fighting education freedom because they are counting on these children to carry the workload, carry that money into the system, the retirement systems in the state. That should be everywhere. Everyone should get that, put it everywhere. I'm on Twitter, it may or may not be there, share it.
Yeah. Well, I think we saw this so clearly illustrated during COVID. And for background, I graduated from homeschooling, and my whole family has homeschooled at one point or another. So that's my backdrop for education. And certainly a very clear example of focusing on students and not systems. But when you then try to look at the public school system, Maine had some of the most horrible restrictions during COVID, and how those affected our students tremendously. And yet the system just kind of paraded on, running over students. But during that time, I think we saw illustrated the most clearly that maybe the mainstream ever has, is how individualized education was. And we saw that because education was moved into the homes, at least for a time. And I think that, at least in Maine, that has helped grow the appetite for funding students instead of systems, because it's been clearly illustrated that we're not.
I would just say that I've been in the legislature for 13 years, and we often have the debate in committee and on the House floor about funding and funding schools. And so I think this little graphic signifies that. There's a row of kids, and their heads have been replaced by money bags. And the question is, kids or school funding units? And for our opponents and the education establishment, I think the answer is they're school funding units rather than kids. And I think that that's the basic argument that we have to address and remind people that we're really talking about kids. The commissioner talked really about that with where education goes, with education freedom accounts and other types of programs where the money can actually follow this kid. Instead of sending it to ABC school, we give it to the family, and they can use it to customize and individualize the education for that student. But it's an important principle, I think. Are they kids or school funding units?
So we've kind of brought up already the change that really happened throughout COVID in terms of education. And prior to COVID, I think a lot of us in the school choice movement saw incremental changes, but didn't really see an overwhelming amount of support from the general public. But during COVID, I think a lot of that really changed. So how have you seen the public perception changing from prior to COVID to now, and how can we use that to continue advancing education freedom?
Gosh, okay. My daughter was actually in school during COVID when the EFAs were first being talked about. And I wanted to get an EFA. We wanted to get her out. She was in the 8th grade when it first started. And then when she went into high school, she was going to school for 75 minutes a day, 4 days a week, sometimes 3 days. So I was really looking forward to being able to get an EFA to get her out. And it wasn't just COVID, it was for a number of reasons. Academics have really kind of taken a back seat in public schools. But I think a lot of parents have seen this now. and many have moved on, and there are some, definitely, I have constituents waiting for us to turn into universal EFAs.
We've certainly seen in Maine that COVID opened folks' eyes to the educational needs in our state. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're doing great. A quarter of Maine students can read and do math at grade level. What more could we want? But, you know, the other 3/4 that aren't doing so hot, parents, for some reason, want to do something about that. The problem, of course, in Maine is that we have a Democrat majority legislature where they've primaried out any reasonable people who might support parental rights and the ability to educate our children sufficiently. So that battle remains. We have folks across the aisle in the everyday Mainer public who are eager to see school choice, yet the leaders in the state house are not. And so 2026, certainly as we see a push at the federal level, I'm hopeful that it will catch more traction in Maine such that it makes a difference in our elections.
When I was in the House in 2018, we couldn't get education savings accounts passed. Like, Glenn and I worked so hard. We were trying to shake down people. Like, we just could not get it passed. And I was looking back recently at the polling at that time, and of course they use emotional language like vouchers when we don't have a voucher program here. And the polling was about 41% in favor. And now we're looking at polling that is upward of 70% in favor for voters and even higher than that for parents. And I think that this last election actually spoke volumes, because we had Joyce Craig, who was running on defunding the Education Freedom Account program, and Kelly Ayotte, who was running on expanding it, and we saw how that shook out. My opponent ran on defunding it, and I have been a very vocal opponent. My own family used EFAs, so I believe in them. I know how great they are, but we've also seen a shift since COVID, where parents are paying more attention, I think, to the curriculum and what's happening in the schools. Just this morning, I was sent an email with divisive concepts that were taught in 8th grade. And parents sent it to me because they're livid. They're livid that kids were given this. They had to do a survey it had a little wheel on it that showed if you were a white, straight male, you were out of the gate faster than anybody else. And anything, if you were a woman, you're behind. And the theme was actually that it is a myth that if you work really hard, you can achieve all your goals. And that's what they're putting on kids. Now, can you imagine being in the classroom and being a minority student reading that you just don't equal your white peer? And they use the word cisgender in here too. Asking 8th graders to identify their sexuality. So I think parents started to pay attention during COVID more than they had in the past. And I think that's the reason that we saw such a jump in approval for the education freedom accounts.
I think COVID really opened a window into public education for parents and a lot of us. And certainly many public schools and teachers' unions are helping parents to realize what's going on. A friend of mine, Corey DeAngelis, who some of us know of, wrote a book called The Parent Revolution, and he dedicated the book to Randy Weingarten, who's the president of American Federation of Teachers, because according to Corey, no one has done more to advance school choice than Randy Weingarten and the teacher unions. So I think that's great, and that's funding, or not funding, but really promoting the move and the freedom for parents to explore other options. But I just wanted to mention also, since we were talking about reading scores, I've had legislation about what's going on in school libraries and some of the materials, and I've been accused of banning books, wanting to ban books. Well, my answer is, look at the reading scores. With those reading scores, we're banning books for those kids, because if they can't read, all books are banned for them.
So you mentioned COVID really being a window that was kind of open for parents, and I think even more than just them realizing what was going on in the school system was a fundamental shift in people's attitudes about education. And no longer is education just this mindset of you send your child down the street to whatever your local assigned school is. And I think many people grew up in that world where that's what it was. And so now I think we're seeing a movement towards parents waking up and realizing that, wait a minute, these are my kids. This should be my decision. I should be the one figuring out what education system is going to work for them. And so I think really this whole movement has opened up a world of opportunity for us to kind of share what we've been saying all along, is that every child is different and we need to be giving these decisions to the parents rather than bureaucracy and public school system. So even in New Hampshire, though, there is still resistance to reform. We haven't passed universal education freedom accounts. There are things like open enrollment, which allows kids to go to other public schools even. There are a number of things that we still haven't gotten to. And I usually hype up New Hampshire and talk about how great we are, but there is still resistance. And I know in Maine, you're facing quite a bit of resistance. So what are the barriers that we're still seeing? If we're looking at it and saying, parents are realizing that they now have the decision rights here, what's the barrier holding us back?
I think the words school choice give the Maine Democrats in the legislature like an allergic reaction. They break out in hives and they start itching. So I put forward a bill to expand enrollment, open enrollment, and so far I have yet to utter the words school choice because I'm trying not to clue them in that open enrollment is just that. So in our case, it's parents are open to it, but trying to get the legislature to kind of open their horizons, it's not going to cross the finish line this term. For some reason, they're mad at me. So my bill's not going to pass. But I think it's important to have the conversation and let them see the appetite from Maine people. And then let parents see what is possible. We have parents who, I was talking door to door with folks during last year's election cycle, and they were saying, yeah, we take advantage of a superintendent agreement. We live in Auburn, but we commute to Falmouth, so we take our kids there, and it was just common sense. Of course, it should just be my decision. If there's space at the school, my kid should be allowed to attend there as long as I'm driving them. And so you find that common sense among Maine people, and I'm hoping that rubs off a little bit on our legislators bit by bit.
I think not just parents, but taxpayers are starting to see that the return on investment with all the money that they're putting into their local schools is not very good. So I do think we're going to see a shift here probably in the next couple of years. There's going to be a lot more people that will support.
Go ahead.
Sorry. As far as the opposition I'm seeing in the Senate, we put a large investment from our local property taxes into our schools as opposed to what's given on the state level. So there's an argument that the districts that have invested in the buildings and have bonds to build buildings are invested there don't see that it's fair to their taxpayers to let someone to come in from a district that hasn't made that investment because they won't be paying that. So that is the pushback. I don't know how we alter that or make that fairer in people's eyes.
We'll work on that with our open enrollment bill.
Sounds good.
They haven't come up with that one in Maine yet, so could you guys keep that here?
We'll keep it on this side of the border.
I think one of the most eye-opening things has been a growing conversation over the correlation between enrollment and funding. And I think a lot of people just assume that, we're spending more on education because we have more kids to educate, so that must make sense, right? And so the fact that that's not the case, in fact, you see a very clear line of enrollment is going like this and funding is going like that. So it's not even close. And so we're having more and more conversations about that. And I think if we can refocus the conversation around not just what are we paying for your local school, because that's often what it is. Your local school needs more money. That's not what the conversation is. We are allocating money at the state level for a child. Where that child goes to school is up to the parent, but we need to totally transform that conversation rather than the school needs more money. The school doesn't need any money. The school needs to educate the child, so the child comes along with the money. So I think that we're seeing more conversation about that. We had a bill this year in New Hampshire that I think would have been really interesting to essentially cap school district budgets. Does anybody want to touch on that bill? Glenn, maybe?
It didn't make it to us, so you guys.
No, it didn't make it to the Senate, no.
The Senate has a chance to fix that, though.
Yes, right. You like to attach bills to other bills, so yes, we've had a number of bills passed to allow for tax caps voted on by the voters for school budgets. We tried to put in place in the budget not really a tax cap, but a tax ceiling, so that local school budgets could only increase according to basically inflation and enrollment increases. If the voters wanted a higher budget than that, it would require a 2/3 vote by the voters. But that did not make it out of the House, unfortunately. But we'll pursue other avenues in that regard. And I just want to mention one thing in terms of what we have to overcome. I think for some of us who sent our kids, I'm older, so my kids went to public school. I think maybe things are changing for younger families, but I refer to it as the big yellow bus syndrome. We're just used to sending our kids out the door and putting them on the school bus and then getting them off the school bus and when they get home. But I think that is changing for a number of reasons that we've talked about here.
I'd like to just talk about the tax cap for a little bit, not the bill, but they do have the ability to do this locally. And this year, a bunch of towns tried to do this. In my town, and so this happens at the deliberative session where they're voting to move this forward. So it depends on who shows up, what's going to happen with it. So they actually took our tax cap, because we didn't have enough people there, and raised it to 50% so that they could raise the budget 50% every year. So that's the kind of things that are happening out there.
I think there was one town that raised it 100%.
Would not surprise me.
So if we were to switch to a model of student-centered funding, and instead of looking at education as, again, like the yellow bus syndrome, and we were to instead focus it on the student, what would this kind of a system look like if I don't know, like let's look 15, 20, 50 years down the road? What do you think the big changes would be in this type of a model? Big question.
None of us will be here.
I don't, right.
So when it comes to education freedom, in my experience, and this is what I'd like to see for every family, my two sons chose different schools for high school. They graduated from two different high schools. One, they got to shadow, which was when we were looking to figure out what was the next step in their education. We actually asked the Manchester School District if they could shadow for a day, and they said no. They did not want the kids to see what they were going to be up against. But in the private schools, they want you to shadow. In fact, they require you to shadow before you come in to make sure it's a good fit for you. And by doing that, each of my children chose a different school. One was a larger school, one was a much smaller school. One had a lot of sports and extracurricular activities. The other one was more of a small, tight-knit community. And they both thrived. And so in the future, I would love to see kids can try on different education until they find the one that actually suits them.
One example that I often think of is a constituent of mine, a constituent family, where the dad is an electrician, the mom is an artist. She teaches art classes to public school kids and homeschool kids. And their son is 14. And the day that I happened to visit their home last summer, he was off four-wheeling in the backyard with his friends. And so I had a conversation with his dad, the electrician, and he said that his son's friends were all really jealous because the previous year he had gotten bored with public school, and so he had started interning with his dad. He got all of his online school done in a couple hours, a few times a week, and then he was learning to be an electrician. And so he had money for four-wheelers for the backyard, and their house was now the destination stop. But in having that conversation, his son is learning incredible practical skills at the age of 14, life skills. Now, he doesn't want to be an electrician, actually, for the rest of his life, but these are skills that will carry him through whatever he does want to do. And when he graduates from high school, he's going to have quite a tool set beyond what a traditional student has. And so I just think that the flexibility to think outside the box is hugely missing from what that orange bus expectation is, and that needs to be built into the system so that it's commonplace that our kids are graduating with skills and feeling empowered instead of dumbed down.
In terms of thinking outside the box, I know many, if not most of us, will miss Commissioner Edelblut when he is no longer commissioner. But also, as the education freedom and education options expand and grow, we need to let parents know what options are out there. And we are working with a group called Education Options. You can check out edopt.org, who is doing this work, letting parents know with a website and expos around the state about what options are out there for you. And I think the second part of that, and I think Jody Underwood, you could talk to her about that. She's going to be here. But the second part of that is we also, education freedom for students and families, one thing, but we have to let teachers know that there's education freedom for them as well. Entrepreneurship, the education marketplace has to expand. So that's the other piece of this, is letting teachers know that, two certified teachers can start a charter school. One teacher could start a micro school or a learning center, something along the idea that the art teacher and the electrician, so that there's opportunities out there for everybody, not just students. And that's something we really have to get across also.
I think the awareness about the options is a great point to bring up, because when we talk about other policies like taxes, we get rid of a tax. I don't have to go out and tell you that we got rid of the tax for you to be able to take advantage of that. Where with education, you have to know that this exists. You have to know that there are options out there. So it's really important for us to be talking with people around the state if you're from New Hampshire, or bringing these ideas back to your own state if you're from elsewhere. And like he mentioned too, we won't have a Commissioner Edelblut that's coming up with the next great idea and implementing it in the education system now. We need to be the advocates for that. We need to be going out and talking to people about, did you know that you don't have to send your child down the street to the local public school if you don't want to? So how are we, I guess, framing this conversation with parents and taxpayers? And is there a message that you find is resonating well if you're going like door to door talking to a voter, or you're talking with a neighbor about education for their child?
So one talking point that I think has been really effective, especially with the universal EFAs, and we're getting rid of the income limit on it, when people start to push back and say, well, wealthy families shouldn't have that. They shouldn't have that. Why do they need that? And you hit them with, well, right now, wealthy families are in public schools and you're paying $24,000 a student for a wealthy child to go to school. Education freedom accounts, you're paying $5,000. So when you break down the money for them, they start to, you can sort of see a light. And I think we're starting to see a crack too in the armor of the arguments from the other side, where people are starting to realize that they've been fooled, they've been lied to. And so the more consistent our message is going forward, I think the more people we start to bring over on our side that will then come and ask us questions about it. Because I get people that come and say, how did you do it? How do I do this? There's a misconception that $5,000 doesn't make a difference in your life. Well, if you put it with the children's savings account, the children's scholarship fund, and then you educate parents to let them know that private schools will also give the kids some scholarship money, then it becomes really affordable for every family.
In my town, we're probably one of the best not probably, we are one of the best districts in the state, the town of Bedford. So I hear, I generally will campaign on quality education. And so there are many that are looking for other options. There are plenty that are asking me for EFAs. But there are others that really just want to fix the public schools. And so while we have them, we're going to be working on fixing whatever we can. We have some plans. And we have a decent majority that I think we could get a lot done. We've done a lot this year. We have big plans for next year. And I know Victoria in the Senate will also be tagging along on that too. So
I'll bring up a question on that. So if you could wave a magic wand today and pass one education reform, could be as little or as big as you want, what would be that one thing that you say, yep, that would be immediately change that today? I
would change the math. Right now, we have Common Core aligned math. It's absolute garbage. I used to call it's child abuse, basically. For a child that has learned math before they go into school, my daughter did. She was like a sponge. She wanted to learn everything. And when she was faced with this illogical math, it was a nightmare for her and for us. Luckily, she had a fantastic teacher who said, just get me the answer the way that you know how. So she didn't suffer with it too much. She just carried that forward and didn't pay attention to anything else. But not everybody has a teacher like that, right? So I just heard from a constituent, same grade, exact same story as when my daughter went through this. She's like, you have to get rid of this math. And I'm like, I know. So that is the one thing that we need to go back to traditional math.
So I don't know if people understand what a great leader we have in Commissioner Edelblue and what he has been up against for all the years that he's been in that office, and how he has fought tirelessly for children and families when they were trying to take him down. But I was recently talking about the math because it was before us, because we have to have a special pilot for math because our kids can't function in math. They are going to college and having to pay for remedial math. And I was looking back to when the former commissioner came before us in Manchester, and the school board was saying, what's going on with this Common Core math? Our parents are complaining they can't help their kids with the math. They don't understand it. And I won't even bring up the lattice because I know people still have PTSD about the lattice math. And the Commissioner Virginia Berry looked at the school board and said, that is not the skill set of parents. They are not supposed to be able to help their kids with their math homework. So if I had one magic wand, I mean, I think it has to have two prongs because the first one gets rid of the unions. And the second one puts value back on the parents as partners in education in any kind of school system that they're involved in.
Well, this one's pretty much a no-brainer in Maine because we're very far behind the New Hampshire curve. So it would be universal education savings accounts with a caveat tagged on at the end, and that is to remove the cap on charter schools because we have a cap of 10 in Maine, which is ridiculous and a huge disservice to Maine students. It's like the lottery. When one of the charter schools that we had closed recently, it was like everyone went, oh my gosh, there's an opening. And everyone that had wanted to start a charter school attempted. One person, one entity got it. But that would certainly, those two together in one large bill.
Just following up on math, I think it's broader. It's the basics, right? Commissioner Edelblut and several of us in the legislature have tried to get a concentration on basics. In our law, we have math, science, English, social studies, and then maybe 8, 10 more subject areas, art, music, etc. Representative McGuire is shaking his head. But he's tried to do something this year last year I tried to do something, said just with emphasis on math, English, social studies, science, and attention to all the rest. It was defeated, and I was roasted. I nearly got, well, I won handily, but my opponents were all over me for wanting to get rid of art and music and everything from the schools. I said, no, just let's pay attention to the basics. Look at those scores. Let's pay attention to the basics. So that's one thing, and that goes into education freedom, because if the school establishment is resisting innovation and common sense things based on the data that we see, then they are in trouble, not us. They are in trouble.
All right,
Can
go
I
ahead.
add one more thing on there? I'm not a big fan of banning things, but I would tack onto that really large bill banning phones in schools for students.
Yeah, you can get more than one clap for that, no? All right, we're going to wrap up our panel here, but I want to give one last request for everybody here. We've talked about how important it is that people know we have education options, but we also need to be going out and talking with legislators about that too. Even some of our strongest supporters are only hearing from the other side here. So to them, they're fighting an uphill battle. They're just the only one fighting against this gigantic mountain of attention from the other side. So if you go by the Americans for Prosperity table out in the hallway at all, we are writing letters to legislators, asking them to support education freedom, thanking them for their votes, and then we're also filming videos. So if you want to talk about why education freedom is important to you, we're going to be putting those videos out on social media, just trying to continue to explain to people what our vision for education is. Because right now, the only alternative viewpoint is the messaging that all of us just want to defund public schools and we hate children and don't want them to learn. So we really do need to combat that and talk about what is our vision for education, why is our side better, and what are we going to do to help other kids achieve that same pathway. So I really appreciate the panel of speakers being here, and thank you to all of you for coming out for the education block here. We've got plenty of other great speakers this afternoon, but I believe next is lunch in the other room with a speaker. So thank you, everybody.